Senator Portman, thanks for coming in. Really appreciate it today.
Good to be on with you again.
The GOP tax plan has passed the House and heads to the Senate now. As it stands right now, can you support the bill?
I can. We actually voted it out of our Finance Committee last night, and what I like about it is it does have real middle-class tax cuts, which are needed right now. You know, people have not seen their wages go up on an inflation-adjusted basis really for a couple decades, and yet expenses are up, and that middle-class squeeze is very real here in Ohio. So I think it'll be helpful. In Ohio, it's about an average of $2,400 for a median income family. And that may not sound like a lot to some people, but that's a lot if you're working paycheck to paycheck and trying to make ends meet. So that's helpful. And then I think what it does on the other side with economic growth is helpful too, because right now, if you're an employee in America and you're competing globally, like the workers at ArcelorMittal or the workers at the GM plant or Ford plant, you're working with a tax code that makes you not competitive. And so it changes the tax code to make it more competitive. That will add not just more jobs, but better jobs if we do that right. So I'm hopeful we can get it done.
If my civics class from 9th grade serves me well, if it passes the Senate, it now goes to a committee.
That's right.
In the House.
Yeah.
How optimistic are you the House and the Senate are going to be able to work this out? Because the bills are quite different.
They are different in some respects. I just met with a bunch of folks here in Cleveland who had helped renovate Playhouse Square, for instance, and they used historic tax credits, new market tax credits. That's in the Senate bill. Less so in the House bill, and so there's some differences in there, and I'm hopeful that we can find a way to find a consensus. But on things like that, the historic tax credit, new markets tax credit, those work, and they invest more private resources into a project with a little help in terms of a tax credit. So I'm hopeful that we can, convince our House colleagues on something like that, that that's actually going to generate more jobs, therefore more revenue over time. And there are a couple other smaller differences, but for the most part, the structure is the same. Each have middle-class tax cuts. Each help to make our workers more competitive, and they therefore will add more jobs and higher wages.
And given what we've seen the last year or so, you're optimistic that the Senate and the House can work this out?
I'm never entirely optimistic these days because things just, tend to get into the partisan gridlock there in D.C., but I'm hopeful that we can get this one done. I think it's a good bill in substance. I think the process is better than health care was, frankly. I think we'll get some Democrat votes in the end, probably not a lot, but some, because there are a lot of Democrats that strongly support middle-class tax cuts and would like to see a global situation where we don't have our U.S. companies being bought by foreign companies. We've had a couple Cleveland companies literally pull up stakes and move their headquarters overseas because of our tax code. They take jobs and investment with them. We don't want to see that. So I'm hopeful that we can get this thing done.
Let me ask you about a story that's breaking here in Ohio today. Supreme Court Justice Bill O'Neill posted something on Facebook that's getting a lot of attention. Are you familiar with what's going on?
I'm really not. As I walked in, Karen mentioned something about it, but I don't know the details.
So you don't want to comment on it at this time?
Yeah, I'll take a look at it, maybe get back to you with a statement.
The Roy Moore story in Alabama also getting a lot of attention. Do you think that Roy Moore should withdraw from the Senate race in Alabama?
I think he should. I think he should step aside. I think these allegations are serious enough, and it's not a court of law. I understand that, but it is for a Senate seat, and these women are on the record. So I think their allegations, have a lot of credibility, and I would prefer that he would step aside. Now, I didn't support him. I had endorsed another person in the Republican primary who did not win the primary, but I think it'd be better if he stepped aside.
I have to ask you also about the Al Franken case from yesterday, where he disclosed, or he admitted that he had done some things inappropriately in years past. He has actually called for an ethics investigation of himself. Do you agree with something like that? Should that take place?
I heard that he said that. I think that's appropriate, given not just the allegations, but the photographs, and I think his own admission as to some of these issues. So I think it's appropriate.
As we head into 2018, an election year for a lot of folks, how do you, if you were to have a crystal ball and kind of predict how things are going to work in Congress in terms of everybody getting along or not getting along, are election years typically tough years for those kind of things?
Yeah, typically it gets even more partisan, and it's too partisan already in my view. On the other hand, I remember we passed welfare reform with Bill Clinton during an election year. There have been some tax bills passed during an election year. So when people focus on getting things done, I think it actually helps them politically. I mean, I may be an outlier on that, but I think most people in Ohio are looking for people who are elected to actually do the work they were hired to do. And so I'm not up in 2018, but those who are, I think focusing on actually having some accomplishments on the board, which are, by definition, going to be bipartisan. It's very difficult even to get something like the tax bill done, which is something that Republicans are more excited about without some bipartisan help. So my hope is that 2018 will be a year when we will do things on the insurance market to try to get rates down. I think there's a good opportunity there to come together and provide these payments that were unpredictable right now, called CSRs, and provide more flexibility to states like Ohio. That could be something that could be done. I think infrastructure is an opportunity next year, to move ahead with an infrastructure bill. And, following the tax reform legislation, I think it is appropriate we focus a lot on worker retraining, because I'm hearing from the business community, including here in Cleveland, yes, they think the tax relief is going to be very helpful to encourage investment into their plants and equipment and people, but they're also having a tough time finding workers that have the skills to meet the jobs that are out there. So I think worker retraining is another place where you can see some bipartisan cooperation.
I ask you this every time you hear President Trump has not indicated if he's going to run for re-election in 2020. Is Rob Portman possibly considering somewhere down the line? You can break some news here. Running for president 3 years from now?
No, I'm up for re-election. I think it's 2022, and I'm focused on getting stuff done. And we've had some good luck even in a partisan year over the last year, and passing legislation to deal with the opioid crisis, passing some legislation that deals with this issue of trafficking, sex trafficking in particular. And I'll continue to focus on trying to get stuff done.
And finally, again, going back to the tax plan, I think the president said he wants to have this done by Christmas. What do you think? Is that going to happen?
It's possible. The Senate committee has now completed its work, but now it's going to go to the floor of the Senate. And anybody can offer an amendment, and it can go for a long time. So we'll see. I think it's possible to get it done before year end, and I think it should be, because that way you can get started right after the first of the year and help give the economy a nice shot in the arm.
All right, Senator, thanks a lot.
You bet. Thanks, Russ. Always good to be with you.
Yeah, good to be with you as well.